past 2 years, the topic that has reverberated around business school corridors, in business school conferences, and in the associated literature most frequently has been the recent financial crisis. Its origin, its unique anatomy, the role played by business schools as a generating force, and the lessons locked up for the business education industry in the aftermath of the meltdown. The Queen of England set the tone on a visit to the London School of Economics by inquiring from the British Academy why nobody had noticed that the credit crunch was on its way. After all, economists understand financial bubbles very well. They know that the causes differ, but that the anatomy is sort of templated. The financial boom is generated by some trigger event, new securities emerge, financial innovations abound, and cheap credit drives inflation in asset prices. Irrational investors appear and massive overtrading and speculation occur in the absence of adequate financial controls. As leverage increases, fraudsters and tricksters have their day. Nagging doubts arise in the minds of more rational market participants, which leads to a selling flood in which marginal institutions, firms, and banks fail in a panic sell-off, followed by debt deflation, and a new base building leads in the recovery phase. The Queen, I'm afraid, has posed the wrong question. The end of the bubble was foreseen by many. I had personally attended several public addresses by Mr. Tito Mboweni, where he warned South Africans that the good times were drawing to a close. What was not foreseen was the exact form the crash would take, the timing of its origin, and its ferocity. These should be the focus of any study trying to comprehend the crisis and the unique lessons flowing from the burst of the bubble. What then was unique about the end of this period of prosperity? Well, firstly, I would say it was a certain disaster myopia. The financial crisis was preceded by almost a decade of growth and increasing living standards, stemming from a savings glut, inducing a global feel-good factor. For many of us, the previous crisis had faded into obscurity, and for many young influential professionals and consumers, it had the status of a myth. Even if the feel-good factor is discounted, numerous authors have shown that the reliance on the normal curve for risk estimation leads to serious underestimation of risk. Taleb draws our attention to events which are outliers beyond the realm of our regular expectations. They carry an extreme impact, and after the fact, they seem to have been predictable. And financial sector risks are not the only risk the world faces. Although events in alternative domains will also play out in the financial domain, of course. Consider the uncertainty of the outcomes and the enormous costs of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Terrorism, the threat of global warming, a new multipolar world order looking for leaders, global pandemics, natural disasters calling worldwide destruction, and Marieke Weppener reminded me yesterday, reputation risk. Other risks can be more subtle and better disguised. Business and economic leaders seemingly focusing on short-term return horizons, vast differentials between the rich and poor, between countries but also within countries. A society focused on money over achievement, charisma over character, and the dearth of leaders willing to defy conventional wisdom and to shoulder the mantle of Sir Lancelot in defending that which is right and which is noble and which is true. I now turn to systemic risk. The ferocity of the crash was vastly underestimated. due to the fact that some of the best mathematical minds in the world employed to calculate risk for financial institutions lost sight of the bigger picture and neglected or ignored the risk to the system as a whole, rather than to any specific institution, instrument, or exposure. Asset portfolios representing financial networks with node defined by assets and links expressed as correlations. In a similar way, the global financial system is a network with financial institutions as nodes and links defined by the interconnections between these institutions. The evaluation of the system risk calls for the knowledge of the risk of the counterparty and the counterparty's counterparty, and so forth ad infinitum. Lehman Brothers was particularly sensitive, was a sensitive example of this phenomenon. To understand the full consequences of Lehman's failure, despite employing 4,000 risk managers, would have called for a detailed comprehension of the full topology of the network. And this brings us into the realm of the intellectual landscape of the science of complexity, of which Stephen Hawking said in 2001, I think the next century will be the century of complexity. If you extend the financial nodes in the global system to include the environmental, health, energy, social, economic, political, and spiritual subsystems, we only begin to perceive the systemic risk internalized in the flat world of the 21st century. Misaligned incentives. The financial crisis again spotlights what we call the principal agency problem, which has always been with us, is still with us, but becomes more pronounced in business cycle booms. Financial innovation has lengthened the chains of information and understanding from the investor or the owner to the borrower. Numerous possibilities exist to impair, to modify, or to censor the correct information before it reaches the investor. Principal agent problems operate on two levels: between risk managers and risk takers, and between financial institutions and their regulatory authorities. From this agency problem stems the public onslaught on business schools. Harvard specifically, blaming the events on the shortcomings or the warped characters of MBA graduates by arguing that managers suffer from a simplistic growth mentality, relying on a business model immersed in the cycle of debt-fueled growth. Managers hide their actions behind a veil of secrecy. Managers fail to comprehend the strategic imperatives of the new world. Managers optimize over the short term, leading to non-sustainable behavior and externalities. Managers are lacking in ethical behavior and easily succumb to greed. And managers fail to understand the complexity of the flat world, including that of the new physical environment. To conclude again with the British Academy, the failure to foresee the timing, extent, and severity of the crisis and to head it off, while it had many causes, was principally a failure of the collective imagination of many bright people, both in Britain and internationally, to understand the risks of the system as a whole. I now turn to the consequences and the lessons. The USB has been working on the redesign of its MBA for some time now. Incorporated in the new degree, which was designed before the crash, you will find embedded aspects that some of the foremost schools in the world are only discovering as a result of the bubble. To name a few, a renewed and personalized focus on sustainable leadership, which focuses on ethics, attitudes, and values, and which is high in touch space and is constructed around integrated delivery of subject matter, as has been attempted here in all subject areas. Together with research centers that focus on leadership, on coaching, sustainability, governance, dispute settlement, and the future. However, there are more lessons to be learned from the crisis for ourselves, but also for the global business school community. For me, two stand out. First, we have to radically rethink how we address risk in our programs. We have to move beyond standard deviations and normal distributions and consider new risk models. Consider the ideas of Taleb. Deal with systemic risk in financial markets, as well as the risk exposure arising from global integration, the threat of the domino effect. Furthermore, we will have to pay attention to new sources of risk entering and affecting the world of business, as well as to the management of both internal and systemic risk to assure that risk is correctly priced. An element of the MBA program that may need elaboration and rethink is systems theory, or rather, I prefer to call it complexity theory. Complexity theory overarches the different business disciplines and non-business disciplines and provides a paradigm for understanding the mutual linkages and relationships between variables. Those who call for the abolishment of capitalism due to the crash may do well to remember that business cycles, gloom and prosperity, is not merely a capitalist phenomenon, but was an integral part of both communist and socialist economic systems as well. Booms and busts appear to be a reflection of the human psyche, a process of creative destruction, cleaning the economic system, flushing it out of that which is inefficient and that which is overvalued. The global crash will have an influence on the future of business schools and the organizations they support. In summary, one may see the economic system evolve in the direction of greater administrative authority and more complex regulations. One may see less MBAs becoming investment bankers. The new workplace may not be Wall Street, but entrepreneurial startups. In conclusion then, do business schools then plead guilty to the charge of being responsible for the financial crisis? I think not. Our analysis of the crisis indicates that fingers can be pointed at numerous parties, financial engineers, frequently technical experts without any education in business and economics, but highly skilled in physics and mathematics, auditors, supervisors, risk managers, politicians trying to keep interests as low as possible, regulators, and other functional specialists, usually not trained in business schools. Blaming the MBA seems like pursuing incorrect scientific methodology. Instead of looking for falsification of the proposition, which abounds, the inquisitors look for evidence of confirmation, and they find, as we know, only white swans. For those 500,000 students around the world enrolling for MBA programs, we can unequivocally say that there is no crisis in business schools. It would be unwise, however, to close our eyes to the very pertinent lessons contained in this brief history of an exploded bubble. Welcome then to all our new MBA students. You will not be spared the pain of business cycles.